Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to what I'm very confident is going to be a very, very interesting and enlightening event. But before we start that, I firmly believe that whenever you come to anything in the literary world, you have no excuse to not be thoroughly excited and entertained. So we're going to start off today in the most, one of the most exciting ways I could think of possible. So we're going to start off in the Black church together. So you're all going to be handed a tambourine each, I'm joking. But what we're going to do is that we're all going to turn to our neighbours, turn to your neighbour, ladies and gentlemen, and say, welcome. Say, no, we need some energy in this room. Say, welcome.
Welcome.
And let's also keep going. Welcome. And please anticipate.
And please anticipate.
Unadulterated blackness.
Unadulterated blackness.
Good. Right, ladies and gentlemen, this is going to be... good. Let's get into this, because we want this to be as interactive as possible, as very, very fast-moving as possible too. We need to get everybody on their... just everybody to have a good time, and I think that's really important here. And so for you all to walk away as informed as you are entertained. Reimagining the past, Bridgerton and beyond. This is a very, very crucial topic in light of developments that's happening in TV, media in general right now. In general, this is part of the Black British Lives Matter series of talks that are happening throughout this weekend, curated by the great Marcus Ryder, my colleague to my right-hand side, and building on the Black British Lives Matter book, which is co-edited by Marcus and Lenny Henry, and has a, dare I say, fairly readable chapter by myself in it. In this panel, we're going to be discussing Black and Asian actors in historical dramas. Now, there's something, David Harewood quite recently did something very, very interestingly. He starred in a play, in a play called Best of Enemies at the Young Vic, in which he played a historically right-wing racist politician. And I think it's somewhat funny because, again, in the future, he probably, because of course that's reimagining the past, but in the future or so, that probably won't be any imagination whatsoever, because you probably already have politicians of colour who are just as right-wing as their right-wing peers of the past or so. I'm not going to mention Priti Patel by name, but still moves on.
There we go.
The hit TV show Bridgerton reimagines a British history in which black aristocracy rubs shoulders with white upper classes in Regency England. Now the question is, are these portrayals liberating, or are they whitewashing a painful history of colonialism and slavery? Should black people be cast in the roles of right-wingers and the slave-owning class? I think it's a very, very deep and strong question. So, I would love to answer it myself, but I think we've got more qualified people here today. So, joining us today, on the far right of the panel, we actually have the award-winning actor Pamela Jikiemi, who is also the head of the world-famous drama school, RADA, or RADA, and is currently head of the committee responsible for rewriting RADA's curriculum in an attempt to reframe and decolonise it.
Thank you. I'm actually head of film, television and audio. I'm not the head of the school, just in case it gets out there.
Take your credit when you can, also.
Thank you. But the future is bright.
Absolutely. Steal like an artist, as they say. Next up, we have Marcus Ryder, the great Marcus Ryder, who is the founder of the Sir Lenny Henry Centre for Media Diversity, chair of RADA, and allegedly blacklisted from working at the BBC by the Director General himself due to fighting too hard for black people in the media, an allegation the BBC deny, might I add. I'm not sure who I believe more, Marcus or the BBC, but I won't speak of our own scars, Marcus, but I completely understand. And last but not least, we have Dr. Jami Rogers, who recently published the book Black and Asian Shakespearians. She is an honorary fellow at the University of Warwick, and sits on the committee of the Act for Change project. She oversaw the largest ever study on race and racism in casting auditions and wrote the groundbreaking report on East Asians in British television. Spoiler alert, for the people who have not read the report just yet, I'm so sorry for the spoiler alert, but there are no East Asians in television, essentially. So it's
practically none.
Rather short report. Let's dive, ladies and gentlemen, please give a round of applause to, please give a round of applause.
But it was groundbreaking.
All right, let's start off with a very, very difficult question. Did you all watch Bridgerton, and what did you make of it? Let's start with you, Pamela.
Yes, I did watch Bridgerton, growing up in the era of upstairs, downstairs. And it was my young adult children that were keen to get into it. Plus, I've been a huge fan of Shonda Rhimes since I discovered on a train to Poughkeepsie in New York that she was the person behind Grey's. I found it interesting and complex on a number of different fronts. I could see what she was aiming to do with it, and I think I applauded her for that brilliantly, because the books were nothing like the dramatisation. They were just not very good. As I leaned forward and watched it more and more, there was a point where Lady Danbury made a big comment about race. All of a sudden, it sort of stood out like, if you pardon the expression, dog's balls to me. And I thought, why would she say that as though no one's noticed? So it raised a lot of questions, it opened a lot of doors and broke down a lot of barriers, but at the same time, it left quite a bit of a trail in its wake, which is still part of an ongoing conversation. So does that, yeah.
So Marcus, did you watch it? Did you watch Bridgerton?
I watched the first season.
And you were disgusted.
I couldn't really get past the first programme of the second season.
Oh,
if
wow.
I'm being completely honest, I didn't really enjoy it. Bridgerton, and maybe this is why this whole panel's here, really troubles me, you know, in that in some ways it is absolutely groundbreaking. You've got lots of black characters, and in the second season you've got lots of South Asian characters in key roles and reimagining them in those roles, and we'll talk about whether that whitewashes colonialism. But it also troubles me because it played up to a lot of standard tropes. The black man is the virile, beautiful man. It does not break down or challenge perceptions of black female beauty. You know, it's well known that black men are meant to be desired in society. You know, so there are sexual gendered tropes that it plays up to. The white woman in season 1 is still the most desired and most fragile person. So it worries me that it definitely breaks down certain barriers. It might reinforce other stereotypes, and then I worry about what I assume we're going to discuss about what is our perception of history.
Absolutely. Just a quick question about the just a quick question to you, Marcus, about the portrayal of black men in it. Have you ever seen the film Drum?
Drum?
Yeah. Well, Pamela's seen the film Drum. So on a scale of 1 to Drum, how would you say that the portrayal? Sorry, Drum was a very vicious film that was made by a former boxer, and he played basically a slave who became this sex thing for white women on the plantation. It was pretty vicious stuff. And but it was just a portrayal of slavery that I'd never really seen anything like it, to the point where it just became I left it bewildered that anything like it existed. I don't know if it's something that you would have related to. I don't think it's something you would compare to Bridgerton, but it's something that I just wondered if it's something that you...
I think, I mean, in order to understand any of this, you have to go right back into the past, really, and the history and the taxonomy of race, and the construct of race, and the view of the left-wing liberals, so to speak, towards race and Negroes, as they were called then, and the licentiousness of the female and the laziness and stupidity of the male, but their productive qualities were quite prodigious. And this is what underpins what you were saying within Bridgerton, this continual idea of the black body is a political body. Yeah. You walk into a space and that's, what do you see when you see me? So how do you break that down when you then see it in something like Bridgerton and you think, okay, great, and then it's the male, black male is this sexual beast, wonderful, not too dark, not too white. The black females don't have any real agency, and there are 1 or 2 black female characters on the periphery, but then where did they come from? But looking at the breakdown of that society and that community, where did they just arrive from Mars? So it's the continuation of some of these issues. Sorry, Jamie.
No, it's okay.
Please.
No.
Sorry, Jamie, please. Have you seen Bridgerton?
No. I haven't. The money that it would take to, what is it, subscribe to what with Netflix or something goes to watching football. So.
Okay.
But flippancy aside, I've been watching my social media, which is filled with women of color, female scholars of color, who are critiquing the casting, which I think is both great because you've got women, particularly women of color, getting these roles that, like, even 2 years ago they wouldn't have been allowed to play, but yet the way people are being cast is very problematic because it conforms to the stereotypes that just with a little more creative thinking and awareness, they could have just not done that.
Absolutely. I think just moving on to our second question, it's a question about historical accuracy in drama in particular. Does it matter?
I think.
Let's start.
Jami.
Jami this time.
Well, I would say define historical accuracy because I've done a lot of work on Shakespeare and casting in Shakespeare particularly, and the arguments about that some of the groundbreaking actors encountered when they were working at the Royal Shakespeare Company were told, oh, well, there weren't any black people in Elizabethan times, which was not true. So historical accuracy is used as a way of shutting down those conversations about who can be in these period dramas. And specifically with Shakespeare, there's absolutely, at the time he was writing, it was a different culture, it was a different society. They had different codes, and when we make theater now, we are looking at what it says to us today. So historical accuracy in that respect is just a way to keep people of color and women from playing Hamlet, in largely.
So, Rachel, historical accuracy, does it matter, or is it just political correctness gone mad also in terms of?
Well, it's like, as an actor and an actor trainer, one of the tenets is living truthfully in imaginary circumstances. A lot of these dramas aren't set out to be historically accurate. They're meant to be dramas and to entertain. But when it goes a bit awry is the fact that, for example, I put that picture of William Davidson, who was around at the time. He made friends with the people who escaped the Peterloo massacre. What is the representation of blackness and our presence at that time? And as a consequence, a lot of these shows or dramas are completely white. Jane Austen, for example, her books completely, we're taught that, they're still teaching it, but they skirt around the issue of where the money came from for Mansfield Park. Would Mr. Rochester be half as interesting if he didn't have a mixed heritage wife in the attic? Where did she come from? What was he doing? Why was he going mad? Perhaps he originally wrote Amazing Grace. I don't know. But if you can't, race is all the way through, and blackness is present. We've been here since the Roman times. The Heathcliff in Wuthering Heights was Alaska. That's what it says in the book. But it's always the pre-Raphaelite curls and the high cheekbones. And that's a misconception. So I think the idea that if you're going to do it, give people the recognition and the space that they deserve, but don't continue to whitewash it and then act as though we're being done a favour, we're giving you a little something. You can't have part of the history, you have to have the whole history. And until that is made explicit and clear in the education, and people accept that actually this is the British history, this is what colonialism and imperialism meant. We're always shoehorned in, we're doing you a little something, we're doing you a little something. Like the previous slide, William Davidson, he came of his own volition, he had £2,000. He wasn't enslaved. At the time of Shakespeare, Elizabeth had a problem. She wouldn't be too dissimilar to Priti Patel in her attitudes at the time, because there was a sense there was a problem. So we were here in numbers. So I think the idea that if you're going to do it, then be honest. If you're not going, if you can't do it and be honest and have a quality of representation, then you're continuing the same story and the same untruths.
Marcus?
I think historical accuracy, I completely agree with Jamie, and I'm completely educated by Pamela. So historical accuracy is nonsense. You'd have people running around with scurvy, and they'd all be a lot uglier if we were at all historically accurate. What period dramas history tells us in those dramas, and it's also linked to science fiction, is that both genres, science fiction and period dramas, are really about projections of the now. You know, and so who is British now is then projected into the past and is projected into the future. You know, and so that's how we should really view who is considered to be British 50 years ago was purely white, which is why they then completely whitewash, excuse the pun, you know, the historical dramas of 30, 40, 50 years ago, you know. And if you watch the science fiction, who is present now, you don't see it, you don't see us in the future, you know, with the exception of Lieutenant Uhura, and that was meant to be groundbreaking. And so what you're looking at when you're trying to critique it, it's never been about historical accuracy in so much as science fiction has ever been about, you know, scientific reality, you know. It's about projections of the now.
It's about control too. Who controls the narrative?
Yeah.
Isn't it?
It's such an interest. It just makes me think of Elizabeth Taylor, for example, playing Cleopatra. There's never any questions about historical accuracy or anything else, or you're led to believe, I don't know, like that Egypt is somewhere in Surrey, because all the Egyptians had the British accents. And
unless you look at the old film of her arrival in Rome, and the 99% of the people pulling the Nubians were blacked up.
Yes, they were.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
And what's interesting is that I don't know if people watched Chernobyl, the on Sky. Did people see that? If you haven't, it's absolutely awesome, right? So I watched Chernobyl. I think it's on HBO now or Sky. Anyway, and there wasn't anybody within Britain who were talking about, and they all have British accents. Right? They decided to do away with the kind of fake Russian accents, and they all have British accents. And nobody in the UK, and it won tons of awards, nobody talked about historical accuracy with regard to them. Right? I spoke to Russians, and they're like, what's this? Right? And they kind of wanted them to speak Russian. So it's about how you feel about being, how much ownership you have about your story, and whether it is your story or whether somebody else is telling your story as well. So the historical accuracy and whatever is completely about ownership and perspective. Yeah.
Oh, brilliant. There's a very, very interesting answer when you think of it, but especially in relation to, I have watched it, by the way. It was very, very, it's actually made it difficult for me to get into, that everybody was speaking British accents once again, Ukraine and Russia and what's happening here. Right, just a couple of questions in quick succession about the negatives to casting black people in these, what were largely considered to be historically white roles or so, in particular. And then the second, and related to that too, could you all just cast or just shed a little bit light to us on the concept of colourblind casting and what your thoughts are in relation to both?
I believe in casting the best person for the role and in intentional casting. So if you do cast a black person, so I am absolutely cool with David Harewood playing a right winger historically. Both Pamela and Jami, who have trained as actors, that would give you a different backstory. Your backstory of being a black right winger, and I assume as an actor you need to have a backstory to be able to really work out and flesh out your character, right, will be different if you're a woman than if you're a man. That doesn't mean that I'm against women being cast in Hamlet, right, or as Hamlet. It does mean that they need to think through, what does this mean to me being a woman with power as opposed to being a man with power? As a black right winger, what does it mean to me? You know, so you're going to have a slightly different backstory. You're going to, so it's an intentionality as opposed to just thinking that casting somebody, you know, with more melanin or less melanin is like irrelevant. Race is relevant, whatever happens. So I don't believe in colourblind casting. I believe that black people, women, disabled people should be able to cast in whatever, but there should be an intentionality in it.
Jami?
I think colorblind casting as we know it has kind of, it started off as a tool to be able to, for white directors and casting directors and white, because they're basically all white, decision makers, to be able to put people of color into things that made it palatable for the largely white audience that theater gets, for instance. I think it's become, because like Marcus, I think the best person for the job should play the role. Defining the best person for the job depends on your perspective as to who you think is a better actor. And my opinion of one actor might not be the same as everybody else's on the panel. But it's now become a problem because we're stuck in this sort of world where and I will keep referring back to Shakespeare, but basically it's the stereotypes, it's the sort of servant roles that are more frequently cast than, like, Ariel and Prospero are, Caliban, Ariel, and Prospero. And Caliban is referred to as a slave. So Caliban is the most often cast role if you're a Black or Asian actor. Almost nobody gets to play Prospero, the lead, if they're of color or a woman. So it's now problematic because people use that "I don't see color" as a reference to equality when it is no longer about equality. It's morphed into something else that isn't as positive as it was, but it's still the way people are framing the conversation who make the decisions that get people cast. But the whole David Harewood thing, I think it's an interesting example because David Harewood was playing a right-wing American real-life person. So I think the thought process of like having to get your head around that is different to having to get your head around, because he was playing a real person. Whereas if it was a right-wing fictional character, I just wonder if the thought process for getting your head around it is different.
Because you're saying that he has that real character had a real backstory. You can't make up a fictional backstory for him.
And I think you'd have to engage with it in a different way than you would if it was Alf Garnett you were playing.
Yeah. And if his views are predicated on race, I find it problematic.
Yeah.
And one of the issues with colourblind casting is that then we wouldn't be having this discussion. It goes from the sublime to the ridiculous. I watched Line of Duty, not at the time when it was popular, but later, because I wanted to find out what all the fuss was about. And by the end, I got to the end of it, I thought, why do you have lead black characters that have no black friends? They're always in a mixed relationship, which is fine, but there's no other black people. So they're complete in isolation. And I then counted through every episode where there was what I call black and global majority, because that's how I identify. And they were always either walking past, or the big chief would go sit them down, and a black police officer or part of that unit would come, and they'd stand up and he'd go, so what we're going to do is, it happened so consistently, but you'd see everybody else, but the black character was blocked off by the file or the hand. They didn't say anything. The Asian character was the technological specialist, and that was it. And I thought, and this is supposed to be about police corruption. You know, there's a joke about doing research or investigating anything. It's like saying getting the police to investigate themselves. And I thought, well, there it was. It was a celebration of more of the same. And so colourblind casting is used as, it's a bit like the Black Lives Matter situation being weaponised in higher education. It's used as a tool to say, I'll go to a casting and there'll be 15 black and global majority women. I go, oh, it must be our day today. Lucky, how you going? Yeah. Did you get that one? No. Did you get it? No. Then when you see what happens and who gets the role, you think, well, it's an exercise to tick the ace box. So at that moment in that time, you did have 50% people looking at that role or part of your organisation for half an hour, or depending on how late they were running. But when the actual part came, it was given to somebody else. You know, usually a white person. And that's, you know, again, whiteness is ubiquitous. That's the lens by which everything is seen by. And the concept of colourblind casting, I think it's just another little bit of flavour that's put there to distract people from the task.
You hear so many times women actors saying, especially old women actors saying, write roles for me. What you very rarely hear is white women actors saying, you know, why didn't you cast me as that male character? Mm-hmm. Right? Yeah. They want roles written for them about their lives, their reality, their experience, you know, and yet at the same time, it feels as if black people are meant to be, black actors are meant to be grateful, right, if we almost don't see their colour.
We can only be black.
Yes.
It's prefaced with everything else. And I'm a mum, I'm an academic, I'm an actor, I'm not a black mum or black academic. I live my life, I don't wake up every morning and go, oh, I'm black, oh, still, oh no, man, what am I going to do? Oh, well, another day, another dollar. Why can't we be mums or lawyers, and always the barrister, which is great, but it's a 5-second bit. Why can't what's written be reflective of what we see around us?
But it's also about the stories that get chosen to be produced as well, because they're like, I've been thinking about that a lot lately, because it's always the stories about racism, yes, or something awful happening to black people, and never about everything else that happens in lives, like falling in love and you know, the happier things, you know, actually, you know, whatever successes there are. It was always limited because it's gone from like exclusion to we'll let you in this way, but it hasn't grown past that often.
That's why Bridgerton is so great, because it's not about racism, it is about a beautiful love story, and it's trivial nonsense and, you know, and what have you. And you're like, finally, something with black people on, it's not about black trauma, you know, and it's not, we had in the panel just before this, we had Stephen Lawrence's brother. And so it's not about racist attacks, and that's great. And then at the same time, you're like, yeah, but all the wealth that we're playing with is actually built on.
They're sitting at mahogany tables drinking tea.
Yeah, and that tea is obviously from the exploitation of the Indian colonies, and the mahogany tables may well have been chopped down from the Congo, which the Belgian king had been chopping people up with, and the actual wealth in which they're accumulated and being able to have their income distribution so unequal is due to the fact that the people sitting at the table are actually all slave owners, you know, and they get there because black people are in absolute complete misery in the colonies, right? Mm-hmm. So you then dissect that and you're like, this is absolutely disgusting, right, when I'm watching it. At the same time, you're like, finally, it's not about racism, it's nice to see us in a love story. So, you know,
it's like, what love story?
Yeah. Compartmentalisation
also why
that does my head in.
The crux of Bridgerton is about marriage, isn't it? And why is that concept? You know, suddenly with newfound wealth, we need to make sure it stays in the family. So you need to marry well. So that money, then the beginning, you see through that how the money built off blood, sweat and tears is then transferred from generation to generation, and the importance of that, so it's kept. So it did a lot of things, and it does a lot of things, but it's by stealth. it could have done more to provide information about aspects of that, but it couldn't. But then it would have been a dichotomy. You couldn't have that at the same time as that. But the reality of it was that was what was going on.
If we think of it broader, sorry, I hope I interrupted. If we think of it broader, beyond Bridgerton a little bit, we think of plays like Hamilton, which has been massively successful, hugely successful. I mean, I'm still waiting to see it right now. So that's
What?
Yeah.
We're judging you now.
Yeah, you better be, absolutely.
It's on Disney Plus, you know.
Oh, it is?
Yeah.
Okay, I just thought, no, what it is, I want to go see it.
No, no,
Yeah,
it's a
you've got
Disney
to
Plus.
see it live. You got to see it live.
It's also, I'm not a banker anymore, guys. So yeah, so my economic situation. No. So anyway, but the key thing about it, what do we think about it? So again, it's casting a diverse cast in the place of what was traditionally white men, in roles that were traditionally played by white men. But not just actually the cast, but actually the reimagining, the speech, the singing, the rapping, and everything else. So the whole length and breadth of it was almost diversified, and giving a different, again, given from the little I have seen, giving a different flavour, a different feel to it altogether. How does that? What do you think about that in terms of in the backdrop of blind casting or race or casting against race, or indeed just generally looking at historical accuracy?
I think Lin-Manuel Miranda achieved something brilliant with Hamilton in that he just took a story and he changed the idea of what it is to create theatre through song and dance and movement, and he just cast it with those that were best. He took a bit of a misstep, I must say, with In the Heights. Maybe they got to him, the big machine got to him, because then suddenly, again, going back to what Jami was saying, it was that whole shadism that comes in, which is part of the problem with Bridgerton, whereby it was a lovely mix. I've seen it twice. Sorry, Nez. Great show, well worth the money and the time, and it just opened. When I saw it before, I knew of it before it arrived here, 2 or 3 years. My daughter knew the words off by heart. It took the theatre world by storm. We have yet to do that here, because it's completely credible that people can walk down the street and open umbrellas and start singing. Julian Fellows said that's why he hasn't cast anyone. They never cast, because you can't have black people doing that. But we can walk down the street, or we can go and see a play where a dead man tells his son to kill everybody, and we do it and go, that's fine, but you can't put black people in there doing that. They haven't seen my family, but anyway. Anyway, so with Hamilton, it was great, but then to continue that within the Heights, he went back to the coffee-coloured ringlets.
Is this the movie?
Yeah. And the black and global majority, men and women of a certain shade, were just completely sidelined. So I think it was a great thing with the one, but the follow-up went back to business as usual.
Just for the same question to both of you, but I want to add something onto it too, and just to flip the coin. I don't know if it is a coin, but just to flip the actual thing on the other side. Did we all see the play on Fela Kuti?
Yes.
Okay, we saw it. If they cast a white man to play Fela Kuti in the same situation, same backdrop or so, and they just cast literally just another point to any lovely white man in the audience over here, but they cast somebody, a white gentleman, let's say the cameraman over there also to play Fela Kuti. And he would be a good Fela Kuti, I'm pretty sure he can dance.
Are you a trained actor?
And he would be good. Well, there we go, but he would look good because he's in good shape. So there we go. So, but if they cast a white man to play Fela Kuti, similar to what they did, say, like Hamilton in reverse or so, for example, and I know we hate to use the term reverse when speaking of racism. Can you just put that in juxtaposition of how we view Hamilton too?
Well, instead of talking about Fela Kuti, I need to answer that through the lens of Othello.
Please.
Because Othello was the part that kind of started the revolution towards colorblind casting, quote unquote, in British Shakespeare, because there was complete exclusion of performers of color from Shakespeare, full stop, even Othello. So here we are,
Anthony Hopkins blacked up for that, didn't he?
Well, he blacked up for it because they tried to get James Earl Jones for the BBC. Equity was like, no, I don't think so. And
Equity's the Actors Union.
Equity, the Actors Union. And it was a 2-year battle between the BBC and Equity. And Equity both won and lost because they won that battle, but they lost it because it wasn't even a black man who got to play the role on TV. But it started
So let me just get
conversation.
this straight. Equity were objecting to because he was because he was American, and they didn't want to import an American actor.
No, Equity, no. That is the misconception in that it has been glossed over as Equity didn't, because they had the power at that time to say, no, you can't have an American.
Sorry, which year was this again?
This was 1979.
Okay.
And the union, it was a union, it was closed shop at the time.
It was a closed shop, but the union's objection wasn't about the fact that James Earl Jones was either black or American. It was about the fact that he wasn't British, black, when there were plenty of people who could have played that role, and the BBC did not, plenty of black actors who could have played that role, and they weren't allowed over. So it was kind of the catalyst to the Norman Beaton wrote a lengthy letter to The Guardian, which is well worth a look, because he was laying out the case for colorblind casting in Shakespeare, and basically said it's, classical theater in this country is a closed shop. So fast forward to now, and you don't see white actors playing Othello for good reason, but the reason that you kind of get washed over you is that, it's the black role. It's like, well, it's the only role actors of color, leading Shakespeare role, are actually viewed as playing, and all the other things like Papa Asayudu's Hamlet, Adrian Lester's Henry V, they're just the massive exclusion, the massive exception to the rule, so to speak. So, going back to the fellow cutie, very long-winded answer, but the reason why it's a power dynamic until actors of color can play, are considered for, and are cast as Hamlet on an equal basis as Othello. White actors should stay away from Othello, even though people like Stephen Burkoff are rabbiting on about how it's racist to not me play Othello. It's like, well, A, you'd be crap at it, and B, you can play anything else, dude. Yeah. Just cut it out. Don't be jealous about not being able to play Othello. So I think it's and speaking as the only American on the panel, I don't think Hamilton would have happened before Barack Obama, who's on Marcus's shirt, was president, because no one could imagine, and part of it's about imagination, no one could imagine a black man as president until it actually happened. So it wasn't that much of a leap.
It was imagined, to be fair. It was imagined in 24.
Well, yes. But largely, and he takes credit for getting Obama on.
He did. Everybody, they played a role. It helped get him beyond the imagination.
But I don't think Hamilton, in the scope that it happened, would have been able to take off in the way that it did. Because in 24 he wasn't a lead character, was he?
He was. I can't remember the actor's name. But he was not the lead in the same way.
Well, after Jack.
I think that after Jack, in the same way that 24 for me feeds into the same Starsky and Hutch, head of the Starsky and Hutch's boss. People, I can see some people who are far too young to know Starsky and Hutch. So people who are 50 plus or whatever know Starsky and Hutch. Right.
Captain Dobie.
Yeah, there was a long-running trope of you have the rebellious police officers, or you have the rebellious people, and you have the sensible person who, and you can even see it in the comedy series Beverly
Hills Cop.
Yeah. Not Beverly Hills Cop. 90210, whatever it's called.
But yeah.
What's it called?
Beverly Hills 90210.
Brooklyn Nine-Nine.
Brooklyn,
yeah.
okay.
And you see it in
Andre
Brooklyn
Brown.
Nine-Nine,
I was
whatever,
just like,
right? And in many ways, that's again what you see with regards to 24. That's what you see in Homeland. It's the casting of the black president, but it's the same trope which we've actually seen from the 1960s.
And like and John Sim in the new series Grace, his boss is Reiki Iola, a black woman, but Reiki's like in there for like 5 seconds, telling him off. Position of power.
It's not the angry black woman, is it?
No, she's not generally angry in it, although she is a bit pissed off with him.
But I think, you know, the Hamilton point speaks to what I was saying with regards to these historical dramas are actually projections of the now into the past, just as science fiction is often projections of the now into the future. You know, my problem with Hamilton, first of all, I love Hamilton, right? I love Encanto. Those of you who have kids, written by the same guy, music's brilliant. You know, we don't talk about Bruno, fantastic.
Not much story in it, though.
But Encanto,
yeah, there's not much story in it, Marcus.
it's about intergenerational trauma, man. You know?
No, I'm sorry. I just
get with it.
my daughter and I all walked out and thinking, it was good. I liked the song, but there's just not much story. It's not.
Listen, I listen to it on the school run every day, so
He knows it quite
finish
well.
Fair enough.
Anyway, but the problem with Hamilton is that if you dissect it, it's not colourblind casting, right? What it is that while the different characters, if you look at the different productions of Hamilton, you have black, you have Latinx, you have white people playing different characters. King George is always played by a white person, right? And so what they're saying in casting King George as a white person and the other characters as black, global majority, and a mixture of white, is that they are trying to say something about race here, right? It's not coincidental. They are saying something about race. And what they're basically saying, if you dissect it, is that the fight against the British was a fight against tyranny, right? And it's a racialized tyranny. They racialized the tyranny. Now, the reality, right, if you read White Freedom by an author whose name escapes me, but Google it, it's an awesome book, right? We are at a literature festival, right? White Freedom. It's saying that what happened is that 1774, 1770, whatever, there was a court case here in England about the legality of slavery in England, right? To which they find it's against the law to have slavery in England. Now that was specific to England, not to the colonies, right? But the colonies were petrified that that law would then go to the colonies, right? Right? And so many people now reinterpret, right? It's no coincidence that 1776, which only happened a few years later, many people interpret the War of Independence of America as actually a war, right, to maintain slavery, right? Because they were fearful of what was coming down the line, right? Now, or not, and even if it wasn't a war to maintain slavery, right, that was definitely an element in it, right? Slavery, and also you get lots of these people, lots of slaves joining British forces, right, in that war as well, because they were promised their freedom. So slavery and racism was a massive element of the War of Independence, right? And it's not a simplistic one. And so in many ways, that War of Independence did not help African Americans, right? Some people say it could, but there's definitely a strong argument that it was actually, at the particular time, was actually against the interest of African Americans, right? And so then to cast Hamilton as being somehow a war to emancipate slaves, right, in those casting decisions, when in reality the reverse may well have been the truth, right? Now again, I'm not against Hamilton, I'm not against that casting, but what I am against is us not being explicit about what that casting says, and us not having that explicit conversation as we're kind of having now. We need to be knowledgeable about it.
I think quickly, that just because I know we've got to move on to like questions, but quickly, I just want to say that it's complex, because there's this, which is absolutely true. But there's also the fact that there's ownership over American history now because of the casting. And also, I actually think there is a black guy now playing George III, because I think maybe I'm misimagining it, but I think, and I'll have to look it up, so I could be absolutely talking rubbish, but I think when I saw it in January, there was a black guy.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
Playing George III. I'll have to look that up.
No, and then I have to change my little speech, man.
You will. Yes, of course, I could always fact check myself and find out that I'm wrong.
You're not allowed phones on the stage.
Yeah.
Absolutely. We're going to questions now.
Okay, so I just wanted to add a point.
Please.
Sorry,
Please,
what
go
Jami
ahead.
was saying about, for me, because Othello for me is a poisoned chalice.
Oh, it's, yeah.
And it's held up as the role.
Yeah.
But it's the only role. But what does it represent, and why is it continually taught? Because it reinforces the view, the racial lines.
And those conversations are fascinating because the Rudolph Walker generation, it was empowering, and now like Adrian Lester, and you know other people who are doing it now, Hugh Quarshie's famous treatise on it, it really plumbs the depths of the racism in the play.
Yeah.
So the conversation about Othello for the actors having to play the role has moved on massively, and it's horrible.
So guys, they are
Play.
begging to ask questions.
Are they?
Yeah, we've got about 10 minutes left.
Okay.
We're
We're gonna go
talking.
Please,
Yes. Stop talking.
please, can we have a microphone for the lady up front over here, and then up the gentleman in the back over there?
Okay, first off, you said you wanted to fact check if there was a Black King George. I did just look it up, and he's played by Michael Gibson. So you are
Oh
right,
no,
there is a Black King George, apparently.
no, he was the original. Michael Gibson's the original.
Oh, okay. I don't know what I looked up then. But, okay, now for the actual question. I really liked how you guys mentioned Hamilton, because I literally wrote it in my little book, being like, should I ask about Hamilton? You guys mentioned it. But I wanted to ask about, you know, Aladdin, how there's like the new one and the old one. The old one, there was a lot wrong with it. And there's like an Arab Muslim woman, there's quite a bit wrong with it. And even with the new one as well, like they've mixed up a bunch of cultures and been like, this is like something Asian. And I'm like, no, it's not. You've confused like 3 cultures. But what do you guys think of it in terms of like colorblind casting and basically everything you guys have spoken about? But what do you think of it specifically, like regarding the new one? If you have seen it. If you haven't, you don't even need to answer my question. It's fine.
Has anyone seen the new Genie? The new Genie.
The genie.
This is the Will Smith one, right?
Yes. So I was going to say, is it the
Yeah, so this is Will Smith before he slaps someone on stage at the
I've got a
Oscars.
6-year-old, man. Of course I've seen
You've
it.
seen it.
Yeah.
Okay.
I've seen
Marcus,
the
give
old
us
one,
your
the new
expert
one.
opinion on these Disney films, which you seem to spend a lot of time watching nowadays.
I take my son to the cinema every single week. To the cinema. I also, because I want to get into film culture.
Nice.
And what have you. Aladdin is really problematic, man. Yeah, it's really hard having the black genie, and he's basically a slave, you know, because the genie is a slave until he's released, and the person you cast for that is the black man, right? And then it then goes back to what we were talking about before about perceptions of beauty, and so. I forget the woman that Aladdin falls in love with, but you know, she definitely conforms to standard tropes of what is beauty with long hair and what have you. So there's real problems with that, and then there's real issues with regards to So this is definitely straying into an area which I do not feel expert about, but the whole conception of Western view in that you are either an oppressed woman beholden at the tyranny of Muslim sheikhs and what have you, or you are some insanely sexualized Seven Veils person, and you see those contradictions of from way back when I was a kid, from Sinbad, you know, to whatever it would be, some terrorist perceptions of, you know, things. And Aladdin, it's really hard to not fall into those different traps, and I don't think Aladdin avoids them, unfortunately. But yeah, I hadn't really thought about Aladdin too hard. I just remember watching it and just thinking, oh my God. Yeah, I mean, but it's a great film. Like,
I'll just quickly interject. There's a really great documentary called Real Bad Arrows, real spelled R-E-E-L, as in real, film reel. And they actually pointed out, it's really, really good because it opened my eyes to Aladdin, the original. I don't know how original it was, but the Disney cartoons, and they pointed out how problematic it was with, like, even the song, where they're talking about fictional Arab land, where they bite or where they cut off your nose or they don't like your face. It's barbaric. But hey, it's home. Are you with me? So it's just like, so that when you're a child, you're just absorbing that, thinking that's perfectly normal. To the point where I remember I was speaking to my daughter, and just dawned on the daughter would be quite when she was quite young too. She's 8 years old now, and we're just thinking of going to Egypt for a holiday. And she just completely protested against the idea of it. And she's well, they'll make us slaves, and it's just really bad over there and everything else. And I was like, what gave you this impression? And it's just everything she consumed from cartoons and everything else. And of course, reading the Bible from time to time too. So, yeah, please. But I'll run to the gentleman over there.
It's fine. Just going back to your question,
Please,
it's funny because there's a Disney movie, The Horses of the Cimarron or something, or Spirit of the Wind. I said, even the horses have got blonde hair and blue eyes. My daughter went, no, Mummy. That's a Palomino. But it was true, it's quite, even when it's anthropomorphized, it's one way or the other.
I think part of the problem is just there is massive underrepresentation and stereotyping of African Caribbeans on television and film. But there's just so little like Mina and East Asian.
Mina is
Middle Eastern, North African, and so there's like one stereotype, and that's I think what you get, isn't it? So it's part of the larger conversation because there's even less representation for other minority groups. So it just makes it even worse in many ways.
Absolutely. Sorry, to the brother at the back.
Just want to say that for me, I think representation is about not just showing the bad, but also showing the good with all its kind of glory, and it's in the independence as well. So my question leads to, I'm going to use the BBC for example. I know that there's other outlets. You hear about, say for instance, diversity and kind of inclusion, wanting to be representing in that. But I was just wondering, in order to kind of change the narratives in the stories, what will it kind of take, or is it a case of that there are doors opening in which where, if you could say, the side of true historians is done, because we've already got books where you can see the history of, say for instance, whether it's Black and Asian people in pre-slavery, etc. But they're not shown on the TV. And despite, say for instance, yes, there's going to be diversity, despite this, going back to what you kind of said earlier about true representation and true characters as well that are inspirational as well too, and hit that diverse. Just wondering how can, say for instance, those stories be told? Who is it that is stopping to say, no, I'm only going to allow this program here? Is it like that, or is it just a case of that there hasn't been a way in order to get it done? Because the work's already out there, there's people already producing books, etc. Just needs to be put to production. I'm just wondering, how come there's still a barrier?
Talent is everywhere, opportunity is not.
Yeah.
I know you're used to hearing that, but in the films that I produce and occasionally direct within my role, I do a lot of work looking for writers, black writers, female writers, directors, crew, and largely I achieve it. In the big organisations like the BBC, they're lazy. It's their friends, and they give friends, and if their group friendship and professional group is not diverse, which by and large isn't, they write the same stories and they want to see themselves. And it's getting in at that level, in the writing level, the commissioning level, the producing level, executive producing level, that's when you have the opportunity to say, let's have a look at this. There's 99% white male doing this. Well, why can't we have women? Where are you looking? Why can't Why can't you get writers who aren't writing, as Jamie said, about being black or their experience, but they write. They're incredibly good writers and write great stories. Then we can cast it. The same with the DOPs. The same with the firsts. The same with the editors. They're great editors. They don't just edit black stories. I don't know how you do that specifically. You're just a good editor. But they don't make the effort. The large organisations like the BBC and the independents, they don't make the effort. That's what it is. It's laziness. They do not make the effort to go out and find people. And when they do find people, it's one.
Just real quick, I just need to pick up Pamela. Right, she is head of film at RADA. She wins awards. Her films win awards. Before Pamela was there, it was, and that's before I was there, thankfully, as well. It was basically a white guy directing the films and hiring a few of his mates, right, to help the students. It won nothing, right? And so if you actually have somebody who's intentional and seeks out the best talent, you win awards. And Pamela is fantastic.
And I showcase those people, not just the actors, but I showcase the screening so that people can see, oh, they wrote that, oh, that's the DOP, what have they done? Because that's not what's happening.
It's actually funny because you say that one of the DOPs on Bridgerton, when I was at the BBC, he actually came in to come see the head of diversity and was pretty much begging for work.
Yes.
And then I can't remember, it was a black guy. I think
Kelvin Ritchie.
Kelvin, I had Kevin down. It's Kelvin, yeah. Brilliant guy. And look at what he is today. He pops over the pond, he does well for himself. Yeah. And it's the exact same situation. But sorry, I don't know if either you wish to answer the gentleman's question from your experience too about, because the key points he wanted to know was almost a demystifying of it, because he's seeing the work there in written format. He knows that people can do it, so he doesn't want to see the stereotypes anymore. But why are these different types of stories, these more empowering stories, why are they not making it to screen? What is wrong with Blacks Be Careful? I mean, the BBC. What's happening over there?
I like that one.
Not as bad as NBC, I'm told. But yeah, sorry. Go ahead.
Well, I think they need to. I think they need to be pushed, and they're not being pushed. I've got one of my friends is a South Asian actor, and he turned up for this role, and it was written originally for a white dude, and he turns up for this costume fitting, and it was like he was put in robes, and he's like, hang on, no, wasn't, how about a suit? How about a suit? So it's like some of it, it's like it's just the tediousness of challenging. If you're actually on the inside, you have two choices in that case. You either just go, all right, I'll wear the robe, I'm being paid, or you go, oi, no. So I think it's laziness. It's also like a complete inawareness of all those books you're talking about. The whole Shakespeare there were no black people in Shakespeare's day. It's like, well, there are plenty of books that are documenting this. What? Come on. So.
It's knowledge. People getting out there, particularly white people in positions of power. People ask me about my role, and they go, when did you work there? And I'm supposed to say, oh, it was probably about 20 minutes after George Floyd lost his life. And I popped up. It wasn't. I got my job before that. I've been in the industry 30 years. I trained as an actor. But then I look at when I was at drama school, I was the only black actor for 3 years. Why are we still in this situation now? Why? I went to an opening of the Legacies exhibition for the Transport for London, and the call out they did to the Windrush generation, and we had two speakers there. One was they were both sons of men who started out working for Transport for London. The white guy had been to America and run the transport system over there and was now at the top of the food chain. The black guy wasn't anywhere close. And I thought, how can this be? How can this be, where the majority of the people that were driving the buses and doing the menial work are still black, and at the top of the food chain after so many years, there's no diversification, none whatsoever. Two guys, it's like two households, both alike in dignity. One was up here and the other one was down here. I thought, what's going on? Because the opportunities and the range of people on panels making these choices is not diverse. We're not getting in to be able to say, I'd like to do this book, or that's wrong. You've got 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 there. I think you need to look at getting some gender fluid writers in. Just see what they're saying and what they can do if they can write. If they can write, give them a chance. They only need one chance, which springboards them onto the next. The door opens. And that's to me, that's the biggest problem. People say, I can't find anyone. Have you looked? Well, no, I rang so-and-so. What are they? Oh, another white person. They don't know any. Oh, there was that boy who was in the kitchen who was really interesting. I wonder if I can get a hold of him. That's what happens. ignoring the graduates and the networks out there. And they go, well, it's not really a black story.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Marcus, I'm going to give you you've got all of 30 seconds to answer the question, then we're going to have to wrap up, I'm afraid.
I founded the centre, the Selenium Centre for Media Diversity, precisely to answer that question. We're 2 years in, and hopefully we're going to be answering that. Google and get to our website, the Selenium Centre for Media Diversity. We produce tons of papers. Jami's written papers for us. Hopefully I'll get Pamela to write a paper for us as well. And you can read some of those papers, and that will answer your question.
Brilliant.
Or begin to, anyway.
Thank you so much, Marcus, Pamela, Jami. Round of applause for Pamela. You good? And a big round of applause for yourselves.